Trade, Economics and Environment as the chair for this session. Mr. Ali Ahmed, Chief Executive Officer of Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute, is with us today as the special guest. And Dr. Mohammad Yunus, Senior Research Fellow of Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies, is the discussant for this session. I would like to request Dr. Pandey to start the session. It's over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. Well, at the outset, I would like to thank SANEM for providing this platform for South Asian economies to discuss on issues of economic, political, and social development. In this session, we are discussing trade and investment, and we have three presentations. Particularly, first presentation is on the theoretical aspects of trade and investment, on the issues of growth and also on the issues of welfare. And that would be followed by some sort of empirical studies and also observation on issues of cost and benefit of regional trading arrangement or free trade agreement. And we have also our special guest, Mr. Ali Ahmed, who is Chief Executive Officer, Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute. And we have Dr. Mohammad Yunus, Senior Research Fellow, Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies. Well, with this background, I request Dr. Rushde Akbar, Assistant Professor at South University, Dhaka, for the presentation.
Akbar is the York University.
York University. Okay, sorry. But it's written North South University.
No.
Okay, so you right now you are with North South University. Okay.
I see. In the paper, it's written York University.
Just a PDF করা তো এই ঝামেলা হয়ে গেছে।
Dr. Akbar, you have 15 minutes.
I prepared my presentation. I'll finish in 30 minutes, so I don't take enough time.
Please try to finish in 15 minutes. Okay, I've gone through your presentations. Maybe it might take 45 minutes to explain properly.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rushde Akbar. The paper I'm presenting, it's titled Heterogeneous Firms, Trade, FDI, and Inequality and Welfare. So I'll try to motivate the paper slightly before I go into the details. So we have this long history of welfare gain from globalization, starting from neoclassical theories to new trade theories. Every single one of them talks about this welfare improvement. But very little has done in terms of understanding what is the link between globalization and inequality. Some of the paper, they do address this question, but they restrict their analysis only to trade. So what happens when we consider FDI as well? At the same time, the literature, they consider some sort of sorting or matching mechanism that leads to higher inequality in the system. On the contrary, I'll try to address the same question in the regime of rent-sharing mechanism. So what would be my methodology? So I would take a standard Melis 2003 kind of model that has homothetic preference. It has firm-level heterogeneity, monopolistically competitive output market. I would define wage as firms' rent, and I would let the firms do foreign direct investment. To be more specific, I would let them do horizontal FDI with proximity concentration. What proximity concentration means in this region is a firm would invest in foreign market only if it more than compensates to avoid tariff. Lastly, a Melis kind of model, it always has some sort of equilibrium distribution of productivity. So I'll take that distribution of productivity and define the employment distribution of the economy. Since I have a wage equation and I have employment distribution, I can apply a random variable transformation technique to obtain a weighted wage distribution. Once I have the weighted wage distribution, I can construct the Lorenz curve and Gini coefficient to study the economy at different state. So what are the assumptions? I have two symmetric countries. They produce two different kind of goods. Homogeneous final output that's not traded in the open market, and a heterogeneous intermediate output that competes in monopolistically output market and that is traded in the open market. A firm pays a sunk cost of FE to draw their productivity phi from a Pareto distribution. Once it decides to produce, it needs to pay a fixed cost of F if it wants to serve in the domestic market, fixed cost of FX if it wants to export, and a fixed cost of FI if it wants to invest in foreign market. Lastly, exporters, they have to undertake another additional fixed per unit cost of tau that can be interpreted as either tariff or transportation cost. The rent sharing parameter that varies from 0 to 1. The constant elasticity of substitution, that is sigma greater than 1. There is no sorting or matching mechanism, so there is no unemployment in my economy. Both countries are same in size, so there are capital L number of workers, and each of the workers are endowed with 1 hour of labor that they supply inelastically. So the consumer side. Consumers face a CES utility system. Given the CES utility, a demand for a variety Q of phi depends on the aggregate income capital R, and on the aggregate price index capital P, and obviously it's on its own price. The aggregate price index capital P, I would be normalizing it to 1. Note that this price index actually refers to the price of the final output Y. So you can think of Y being the basket where you contribute all of the varieties in there. So demand for export good, it depends on the export price charged by exporters, and demand for investment goods, it depends on the price charged by investors, respectively. So firm's wage, it depends on firm's own productivity and the rent sharing parameter theta. I won't be considering the limiting case because at 0, we go back to Merlitz's kind of model, and with 1, all the firms, they charge exactly same price, and equilibrium, I cannot distinguish between firms. Lastly, employment is solely firm's decision. So what is the production side? So all the fixed costs are paid, all the fixed and sunk costs are paid in terms of the final output capital Y. After paying FE, firms draws their productivity phi, and if the productivity draw is high enough, it decides whether it wants to go for production or it wants to exit. Labor is the only factor of production, so it uses labor to produce intermediate goods. Since we have monopolistically competitive output market, I would be equalizing marginal revenue equals to marginal cost, and that would give me the optimal pricing strategy. That depends on a constant markup and the marginal cost of the firm. However, when the firm wants to export in the foreign market, it will have to undertake a per unit cost of tau. So given a firm observed phi, the productivity phi, it would have to charge a slightly higher price in the foreign market. But when investing in the foreign market, in other words, like when a firm is doing FDI, the price remains same across country. The revenue is an increasing function of its own productivity. When the firm tries to export, the revenue will have to be discounted by tariff. But again, like when it tries to invest in the foreign market, the revenue is exactly same across country because the demand structure is exactly same. So now I can define the profit function that depends on the revenue and the fixed cost of the firm. Since the revenue is increasing and I have a fixed cost, using the zero profit condition, now I can segregate the producers in 3 different segments. One of the first segment would be firms who would be serving only for domestic markets, then firms who would be serving for export and domestic market, and lastly, firms who would be serving for investment and domestic market. So let's look at some of the results. As countries open up new channels to access foreign market, it would be increasing inequality along with welfare. So why is that happening? Consider the red line, which is the weighted PDF of wage at autarky, and the blue line, which is the weighted PDF of wage at trade. So from autarky to trade, when we let firms export in the foreign market, firms above the export cutoff would find that they have additional demand for their good in the foreign market. As a result, they will have to increase their production. Now, when they go to the foreign market, they would increase competition in their local market, and that would lead to some least productive firms to exit the market. That would be the top red region, and the surviving domestic firms, they would lose some market share. Now, these two groups, they would release some worker who would be simultaneously employed by their exporters. And the same effect contributes to my country as well, so there would be a general equilibrium effect. As a result, what you will see is the average wage of exporters is going to be slightly higher than the average wage of domestic producers only. This imbalance in the system would create some inequality. At the same time, Mellis kind of model, when we have this sort of efficient redistribution of labor, it always leads to higher welfare. So I'm just going to leave that mechanism because it's very symmetric and it's well known in the system. So these are the results that I've just explained. I'll just skip this slide. So let's look at some of the comparative static analysis. So what happens when we consider a symmetric bilateral tariff reduction? A symmetric bilateral tariff reduction would decrease inequality but increase welfare. It's slightly counterintuitive because tariff reduction is kind of like welcoming globalization, but it would be different because now some least productive investors, they find exporting is more profitable, and some highly productive domestic producers, they find exporting is more profitable. So essentially what's happening is the mass of exporters is getting bigger, and we're taking more of the population and throwing them at the center of the distribution. As a result, the average wage would be, most of the population would get closer to the average wage, and that would decrease inequality. A symmetric reduction in fixed cost of investment would have a different kind of effect. It would increase inequality along with the welfare. So why is that happening? So as fixed cost of investment goes down, now more exporters would convert themselves to be investors, and in a sense what you're doing is you're taking more of the population and throwing them at the tail of the PDF, and that would increase inequality. Access to better technology here basically means that the shape parameter of the Pareto distribution would go down. When countries have access to better technology, now the local market would be more competitive, and that would force some least productive firms to exit the market, and these market shares would be absorbed by, a bigger portion of the market share would be absorbed by investors, then exporters, and lastly domestic producers, and obviously that would increase the inequality in the economy. And the last comparative static is the relationship between rent sharing parameter and the Gini coefficient. So the first region, you would see there is a positive relationship between them. The reason why it is basically saying now workers who work for more productive firm, they have access to higher wage, and obviously it would result in a higher inequality. On the contrary, like when workers share more than 50% of their rents, their competitive edge would be going down. As a result, they would be losing some of the market share, and the inequality would go down. So that is the end of the presentation. I am open for questions and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, so Dr. Akbar. I think this presentation is basically for the economist. And for non-economist, let me try to simplify his presentation. Well, international trade, it increases employment, productivity of the labor force, and also increases the wage level. And the second factor, if there is symmetric liberalization of trade, that increases competition, that also increases efficiency in the economy, and also improves per capita welfare of the labor, but the risk is it might increase inequality in the economy. I think that's the conclusion we get out of his presentation. With this, I request Dr. Somesh Mathur. Dr. Somesh Mathur tries to assess the relative benefit or loss of India signing FTA with RCEP and BRICS, and his assessment is basically based on partial and general equilibrium analysis.
Thank you, Chair.
Dr. Mathur,
Yes, sorry.
you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and let me at the outset thank SANEM for the invitation.
You have also 15 minutes, please.
Yes, of course. This paper is on the relative benefit losses of India aligning with a 16-member group called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It has 10 ASEAN countries and then plus 6, that is China, India, Korea, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia. So we have reached very advanced stage, and maybe we'll see in this year the operationalization of RCEP. But then we also have BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa economies coming together. So then we wanted to look at the fact that whether India should join RCEP or BRICS or both. And this is a conjecture based on free trade area and goods. So the methodology that we employ is the single market partial equilibrium tool and the GTAP model, which is coming from the Purdue University. And this is GTAP model version 9 that we use to assess the impact of the liberalization of India with respect to RCEP and BRICS. So right at the outset, then we work out 4 main trade indices to understand the pattern of international trade. You know, RCEP covers around 49% of the world population, 30% of the world GDP, around 27% of the world trade. And if you agglomerate all the GDPs, it's a 21 trillion economy. So there are substantial gains by aligning with the RCEP. So we work out the trade indices, the similarity index, the trade complementarity index, RCAs to identify specialized products of not only India but RCEP and BRICS countries, and then how intense is our trade vis-a-vis the world trade is captured by the trade intensity index. So we use the data from the WITS, the World Integrated Trade Solution, a joint work of the World Bank, UNCTAD, and UNSCAP. All trade data comes from the WITS software. WITS also does some simulations called the SMART, Single Market Partial Equilibrium. And so then we use this data to do simulations based on SMART model, and then later on we do simulations based on GTAP. So the database, as I said, it's the WITS. For GTAP, it's GTAP 8. Reference year is 2007. And we build around 8 simulations. These 8 simulations are that what happens if RCEP liberalizes its trade with BRICS, and what happens when BRICS liberalizes its trade with RCEP, taking into account all goods, taking into account specialized goods, and then doing something called the reciprocity liberalization. So the details are given in the paper. I want to focus more on the results. This SMART uses 3 types of elasticities. One is the import demand elasticity, import substitution elasticities, and export supply elasticities. And then it works on the trade creation and the trade diversion. These are two variables which are used to evaluate regional trade agreement. Apart from that, it also works out tariff revenue and welfare. Details are there in James and Olerega 2005 paper. So SMART helps you to understand the impact of liberalization on the welfare of the economy, on the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and also the tariff revenue. To give some idea of what happens if you impose a tariff, when you impose a tariff, the domestic price goes up, so the consumers lose, the producers gain, and the government earns a revenue C. So textbook impact, net effect on home welfare for a small economy is always negative, while for a large country, it is ambiguous because it depends on E minus B plus D. E is the terms of trade gain, and B and D are distortions which are created in the economy. Now, if you understand what happens if tariff is imposed, you have to visualize what happens if tariffs goes down. So consumers gain, producers lose, government loses in terms of revenue, and then there is impact on the other variables if one works out the interrelationship, and that is done through the GTAP model. About trade creation and trade diversion, just to give an idea of what is trade creation and trade diversion, you have to see this example which considers Mexico, Asia, and United States, and we are talking of automobile trade. So if you consider 20% tariffs, and you can see that before the formation of NAFTA, it would suffice for United States to produce the same good at home at $22. But as soon as NAFTA is formed, now you can import the automobile from Mexico at a lower cost. So there is trade creation because now you are substituting domestic production with imports from Mexico. This is 20% scenario. Look at 10% scenario. The optimal response of US should be that it should import automobile from Asia. But as soon as there is a free trade area, the trade gets diverted from Asia to Mexico. So the consumers gain, but then there is a loss of tariff revenue of the tune of $1.90. Gains are 0.90. So trade welfare, the welfare associated with this is with the trade diversion is negative. This is the mathematical model that I'm talking about. It uses the import demand elasticity to work out trade creation, and for trade diversion, it uses the elasticity of substitution. It's a matter of detail. You can have a look at our paper and the James and Olerega work earlier. So I'll come to the findings. Now, in case India when BRICS liberalizes its trade with RCEP countries, you find that India gains the most, but then there is a substantial trade diversion which also takes place from the BRICS countries to the RCEP countries. Now, if one works out this liberalization based on specialized products, one can see that India would gain by liberalizing its trade with BRICS, but it should be a two-way trade wherein it invites specialized products from BRICS countries, and at the same time it exports goods with the BRICS countries. So the message which comes out from the SMART analysis is that India benefits more by aligning with the RCEP countries rather than the BRICS, but with a caveat that if you indulge in specialized products, if you indulge in specialized products, then it would be wise for India to trade with the BRICS countries. The next methodology that we use is a GTAP model, Global Trade Analysis Project of the Purdue University. It's a multi-regional, multi-sectoral CGE model. It involves Armington assumption, assumes perfect competition. The welfare change is due to changes in tax policies, and there are wide range of closure options which are involved to take into account different changes. So basically GTAP is three things. It has got a data, which is the SAM matrix. It has got a model, GTAP model, which studies interrelationship among variables not only in the economy but with the outside world. And then it also has these behavioral equations. So behavioral elasticities are considered. So then I'll skip this methodology part just to focus on the results. You will see the results in terms of changes in value of GDP, terms of trade effect, welfare effect, trade balance effect, sectoral output changes. These are some behavioral equations in GTAP model. To save time, I'm going to just discuss the results. So in GTAP model, measurement of economic welfare is a wider term. It depends not only on households' own consumption expenditure, but government expenditure and net national savings. And the results again depict that it would be beneficial for India to align with our other RCEP countries under policy of free trade area and goods trade. So I would end by saying that the reason that India should align with RCEP countries, because there is something what Jagdish Bhagwati says, a spaghetti bowl. We are aligning with too many countries, so it's difficult to assess what are the benefits, costs which flow out of it. Rather than having a confusion all around, it's better to align with these 16 member nations and move forward in terms of liberalizing trade. BRICS makes sense. If India aligns with BRICS, it has to deal in specialized products of its own, but at the same time invite these specialized products from the rest of the world. So you see the same set coming from the quantity index, sectoral analysis. So conclusions, the comparative figures of smart simulation results depict that in terms of welfare effect, India would gain more in aligning with the other RCEP countries than with BRICS. General equilibrium analysis also reveals the same results. But in case if India wants to join with BRICS, it has to deal with its specialized products. So the results are in favor to make free trade area between RCEP countries, which is more beneficial for India relative to make BRICS FTA. And this is only liberalization in terms of trade in goods. If you bring in investment and services, we have to relook in evaluating these RTAs. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Mathur, for a very interesting finding. And I think this result, our Indian negotiator, trade negotiator would find it very interesting. All these results. In the sense, it provides a lot of input to the negotiator. In the sense, first, between RCEP and BRIC, RCEP FTA would be a better option for India rather than BRIC. And the second, in the process of some negotiation, if we include only trade in goods, then loss of revenue would outweigh the economic gain, particularly that emerged from the trade. That's another interesting finding. And another, if we include services in our negotiating agenda, then our net trade gain would be quite high. And fourth, negotiating, inputters, we need to go for sectoral approach, whether it is in services or whether it is in goods, where India is having competitive advantage, then India should focus on only those goods at sectoral basis. That's the major finding of the presentation of Professor Mathur, and I find it quite interesting. But the problem here is Dr. Mathur assumed there is free flow of goods and services. There is no non-tariff barrier. Our trade facilitation system is quite efficient. Here, the issues of non-tariff barrier, and particularly in South Asia, for us, we have Mr. Shaquib Quoreshi, Secretary, Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dhaka. So that would reflect on what are the limitations of all these ZTAP and smart analysis. Okay, Mr. Quoreshi, you have.
Speakers. Well, the chair introduced me in such a way that people may expect that I'll be going into GTAP and all that again. No, I am a generalist, though I had my academic background in economics and mathematics, but I work as a journalist and my presentation is as such. I work for Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. The title is Trade Potentials and Non-Tariff Measures in South Asia Region. So first, I will discuss the popular perception about NTMs, non-tariff measures, and non-tariff barriers, and then historical transformation of this region into a no-trade zone. And then that's my favorite topic lately, the critical factors affecting trade in India. That may include non-tariff barriers as well. And some initiatives to monitor the NTBs and NTMs and some remedial actions. The popular perception about non-tariff measures, at least in this region, is that in SAARC, now that the tariff levels have come down to a reasonable level after SAFTA was in place in 2006, but the volume of interregional trade still remains below 5%. And the blame goes on the non-tariff measures and resulting non-tariff barriers in lieu of tariffs, high tariffs that used to be as a reason. But if we question this popular perception critically, we can come up with like 4 different questions. How valid is this perception? If this perception is valid, how costly is the non-tariff barriers arising from the NTMs? If not valid, then what are the other key factors that are affecting trade in the region? And does the SAFTA sensitive list has anything to do with the poor volume of interregional trade? We know the countries, even after India has progressively liberalizing it has no sensitive list for the LDCs at least, but the other countries have still a very long sensitive list. And what are the correlations between the non-tariff measures, barriers, paratariff barriers, and these factors affecting trade? And I have to touch the GTAP because there were many studies which have tried to assess the cost of NTBs and NTMs using the GTAP model. And one done by like in 2014 by Dr. Salim Raihan, it says that the transaction costs in the regional trade in South Asia, if they are reduced by 25%, welfare gains for all countries will be like about $14 billion compared to a hypothetical zero tariff scenario for which the welfare gain will be $3.6 billion. So it is like if only 25% of the transaction cost may involve non-tariff barriers, but there could be other costs as well. So it will be like more than 4 times than the zero tariff scenario. And there is no denying that non-tariff measures manifested as non-tariff barriers for Bangladesh we Bangladeshis, we are very notorious for high para-tariffs. And it was on the increase for the last few years, though we have a commitment to reduce them after 2017. But they are responsible for a high degree of transaction costs in bilateral cross-border trade, at least in this region. But it remains to examine, critically examine, how large a portion of these transaction costs are arising from these non-tariff measures. And right now, this kind of critical examination is going on from the ADB's SAEC initiative, at least for the sub-region. I believe Dr. Pandey is involved in one of those studies. I am involved for Bangladesh National Diagnostic Studies, and for the region, Dr. Raihan is the team leader. So we are trying to review critically what are the actual cost factors of the measures we have. But there are other issues like poor infrastructure, procedural redundancies, and obsolete bureaucratic and banking practices, which are not NTMs per se, by the standard and legal definition of the, or accepted definition of the NTMs, but they could also be the sources of high transaction costs. This is the GTAP thing that Dr. Raihan had come up with. So those prices, those gains I mentioned. And factors affecting trade, I have identified 12 of them, broadly classified into 3 categories. First, in the first column, infrastructure or trade facilitation related. Second column is market related, and third is regulations related. Under the first, infrastructure and trade facilitation related, there could be factors like transportation, things like shipping, customs procedure, port handling. This has to deal with the trade facilitation infrastructure. If the roads are bad, the transportation cost will be high, of course. There's market-related factors like supply capacity, competition, product promotion. Are we, Bangladeshi entrepreneurs, are capable of effectively promoting our products in the region? Most often than not, we are not. Consumer preferences. Say, if there is a dicel battery, for example, selling for like 20 taka per pair, pencil batteries that you use in any things. If in the market there are brands made in China and there are other brands made in India or Nepal, how the consumers will prefer? That is a critical factor. And regulations, of course, quality standards. Our DG Sarso is here. Investment regime, banking and financial regulations, and incentive schemes. The incentive schemes the national governments offer for certain products or sectors, they affect the production capacity, our competitiveness. So we need to look at them before we can conclude the potential of trade in the region. And now this historical transformation into no trade zone. If we, and I am inspired by the morning session. Dr. Osmani had a very wonderful lecture, and his focus was on the political, economic governance and democratic regime, those kind of things, economic growth and social growth. But we need to look at the history too. That's what he mentioned at one point, and I believe so. And historically, like, prior to and even under the British regime, this region was a vibrant economic powerhouse, producing the bulk of agricultural products and industrial raw materials. I don't remember. I am not a professor, so I am bad in remembering the references. But there was a study which showed that sometime during the British regime, this region, this larger region, which we call Indian subcontinent, used to produce like 1/4 of the global GDP at that time. And what is now? But at that time, we had a contiguous vast territory and one single authority, niches for value addition developed across the region. Say, for example, cotton produced in the Punjab region was processed in Bengal to seek market at home and abroad. Timber from Assam decorated the halls of Rajasthan Maharajas, sultans, and British aristocrats as well. So we are talking about here this social capital. Under the same regime, there were institutions linked. That's what we call social capital, the relationship between the institutions, relationship and dynamics and network of institutions, which have deteriorated these days. Even institutions like SAARC not going very well. So further on transformation into no trade zone, the British regime, colonial and profit-seeking, quickly exhausted the indigenous economic drivers in their motive for fast wealth accumulation. And the exhausted economic drivers acting as limbs to the massive production system after the British left, that was the head. They are now acting weakly and feebly once the colonists left. And political partition in 1947 resulted in economic downsizing in the region. The smaller economies were pretty much underdeveloped at that time. And the cost of India-Pakistan war in 1965 and Bangladesh independence in 1971 was costly in terms of life, wealth, infrastructure, and so forth, and had triggered significant loss of economic partnership and interregional trade in later decades. We have not recovered from those losses. And at present, all 8 members of the South Asia have divergent policy and regulatory regime, which are suitable for competing with one another, but not suitable for complementary or integration, economic integration. So this discourages market access, raises development and emergence of regional value chain for similar products. And there had been studies on NTMs. There had been initiative to monitor NTMs in at least 7 countries. That was under the project, which performed quite some. But, well, let's go for the remedial actions. We need to continue, examine, and monitor the non-tariff barriers. Why are they there? Are they necessary? And if something are really a barrier, then we need advocacy at national, bilateral, and SAARC levels. These critical factors to trade, they need to be examined for deciding on the strategy for regional economic integration. And we need to examine SAFTA sensitive lists critically. There are things like nuclear reactor to onions, both are sensitive. So I think many of the items are redundant, and we need to examine the list. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quoreshi. Now I invite Dr. Mohammad Yunus for comments.
How many minutes?
Okay, I think you have 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to be. First of all, let me thank SANEM for inviting me to be a discussant on these papers. And I must acknowledge at the very beginning that I have very little background in theory, also in trade economics. So as a student of economics, I'll try to reflect on all 3 of the papers on different aspects which I found would help the authors to take into account to improve the content and rigors of this paper. The first paper, as you all have witnessed, is a theoretical paper assessing the opening up of the farms to international market and how it affects welfare and inequality. And the conclusions based on the model is that it does affect inequality. Inequality increases. So based on those equations, there is hardly any disagreement. I'll reflect only on 2 issues. The broad assumptions that were made in the paper that labors are homogeneous across 2 types of farms who are catering to the domestic market and international market. If that is the case, and if the labor market is not monopsonistic, then I wonder how it would be sustained in the long run to have this large inequality, workers working in the domestic farm getting a lesser wage rate, and workers working in the farm that caters to international market getting a higher share, thereby there is existence of inequality. And also the assumption of rent sharing, if the employers are profit maximizers, then they will try to also minimize their cost, and doing so when if the existing laborers are sick, they ask for a higher wage, and there are workers who are willing to a bit take lower wage, then as a rational employer, the employer would try to employ those workers, thereby the disparity between two types of workers will go down. And another thing is that when labor shifts from low productivity workers to high productivity is farm, then if we believe in the law of diminishing marginal return within the capital labor ratio, then the productivity, marginal productivity of the high productivity farm will go down, and marginal productivity of low productivity farm will go up, thereby, and if laborers are paid according to their marginal value product, then the wage inequality will again go down. So, and so if these factors are considered, I don't know, I think the broad conclusion that the persistence of inequality, and also if the time horizon is expanded, farms will accommodate, then there would be internal dynamics who will set a new course of action, and the inequality can again go lower. I think if the author, I know it is a fait accompli to some extent, looks into these issues, then the paper would be enriched. On the paper on general equilibrium, it was a nice paper showing that India should align with the RCEP countries, then with the BRICS, based on SMART and GTAP analysis. The results are descriptive. I have only one point on to draw the author's attention, and in the analysis you have seen that it's not only India. In either case, China is benefited either alignment in RCEP or BRICS, because China belongs to these two groups. So one wonders what happens if China is excluded, how this gain is distributed. Further, also India has membership with SAARC and BBIN, and also one needs to see how these countries, the neighboring countries, affect in terms of trade creation and trade diversion. And the last conclusion, that global value chain, apart from India, other countries are hardly aligned in global value chain. India, because of its Silicon Valley in Bangalore, it is aligned with global value chain. Otherwise, there is hardly any prospect that the type of technology and infrastructure that needs to be in place to engage for country to integrate into global value chain is very distant possibility. The last paper was a kind of review of the historical genesis of the current divergent policies that are in place across the member countries of the SAARC region. And the authors emphasized that it is because of the non-tariff measures these countries are suffering the current level of intra-regional trade less than 5% of world trade of these countries. But it would be interesting to go one step beyond, because there are other issues, the transaction cost, the low level of infrastructure, the trade facilitation measures. If those regulatory measures are analyzed in isolation, then the policymakers will get better feedbacks. And also, in removing those reduction in transaction cost, say for trade facilitation, one needs to also assess how much it costs to the member countries, to each of them to make these trade facilitation issues up to the state of the art, thereby what would be the net gain? So these are the comments I had, and again, I'm afraid I'm neither an expert on trade nor very good in theory, but these are the reflections I have on these three presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Unish. Well, after three presentations and the remarks by the discussant, now I open the floor for discussion, and I request some participants to put direct questions rather than background. And I also request to identify yourself and the presenter the question is directed to. Now the floor is open. Please. Mike, please. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question for the last speaker from the Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He spoke about the local, the regional trade agreement in the form of SAFTA or SAFTA, and then it didn't really move much forward compared to ASEAN and all that. Now my question is, what is the major reason why the preferential trade agreement or free trade agreement among the SAARC countries didn't really move much or didn't really benefit the population in general in a major way? Is it because of the political differences between the two major countries in this region, this is India and Pakistan, or there are other reasons as well? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's what I was trying to alluding to. So,
Collect the questions.
Thank you. I am Alhaj Mohammad Fazlul Haq. I am Vice President of Asian Youth Council and Chairman of National Youth and Social Council of Bangladesh. My question mainly to Dr. Mathur, that we know all the SAARC countries, especially Bangladesh, we have a very youth population, but still we continue to encourage many of these young people in production, in economic field. My question, what is the main reason? How we can involve these very more growing educated young people in more their involvement in socio-economic. They be very much involved in health, very much involved in social work, but not much in trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will be very brief. Actually, the thing is that as we are all the members of the SAARC countries, and we are just observing that, and one of the presenters has rightly mentioned that the SAARC trade is beyond our expectations since long, even though there is SAARC, SAFTA, etc., etc. So can we just think of for some special or specific type of business, as the e-commerce within these SAARC countries are getting popular, and taking care of this e-commerce, can we just use the courier services that is in these countries nowadays? The courier, I think air courier services is in practice, and for taking care of the interest of the small entrepreneur, because they would like to send their goods to other SAARC countries, and they would at the same time wants to take the raw materials from the other countries, say from India. So in that respect, can there be a possibility to use these e-commerce benefits by using these airport customs, but taking use of the Benapole Petrapole land port? That is, as the airport carrier is, I think, 40% costly, more costly. So these customs can be made in the airport, but the carrier could be the land port, that is the Benapole and Petrapole. So how do you think of these issues? I would like to just put this question to you, to this expert. Thank you.
My name is Ahmed Siddiqui. I saw a newspaper report today in Pratham Alo that India is not using the transit that much. Only 3 consignment has transshipped to other part in Seven Sisters. Very interesting. So is it we know that there are informal trade between Bangladesh and Seven Sisters, very much. So we are talking about the feasibility of free trade, Mr. Akbar was discussing. So is it so? Does it supplement that free trade is more feasible than transit and others? Yes.
Only one small query to Mr. Mathur. Actually, you have analyzed to compare the acceptability of RCEP or BRICS FTA for India. But I think these two are not exclusive to each other. So why you have raised this point? These two can march parallelly. These two are not exclusive to each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now could you close, questions from the floor. Now I invite our panelist or presenter to respond. Please respond in 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll start with a very interesting point raised in the very first question, that why is SAARC trade not being as it should have been, because SAARC trade is only 5% of of the whole world trade of the SAARC nations. Well, a couple of reasons. One, we had focused more on trade in goods, but now we have to focus more on services trade and then investments. And another crucial issue is these non-tariff barriers, which the chair had raised. And maybe 2 days back, India's ambassador to Bangladesh had acknowledged that there are a lot of NTBs which exist between India and Bangladesh. So there have been studies. We have done a study on converting these non-tariff barriers into tariff equivalent and then trying to judge that if they come down, what is the impact on trade, welfare, and GDP. So there will be a substantial progress if we can reduce non-tariff barriers along with the tariff barriers. The areas that we could focus is pharmaceutical, IT, bioinformatics, and then more importantly, movement of labor. There is a feeling in India that movement of labor from Bangladesh would reduce wages. But then, unless until you do a study which confirms that movement of labor to India would reduce wages, there is a possibility that there can be a change in output mix. What happened in US, say in the 80s, when Cubans illegally moved to US, again there was a feeling that the wages would come down in the state of Florida. It didn't happen. Only the output mix, there was a change in output mix. With the disintegration of Soviet Union, there was a feeling that all these Russian scientists will move to Israel. It will depress wages of the scientists in Israel. It didn't happen. Only there was a change in output mix. The production of skilled intensive products went up. So unless until you do your homework well, you cannot claim in the parliament that the coming of immigrants would reduce wages. So in that context, this trade of these seven sisters with Bangladesh assumes a lot of importance. But then there are trade facilitation issues. Right from time to import and time to export, somebody raised transit facilities. So UNCTAD has given a list of 17 NTBs, non-tariff barriers, right from sanitary and phytosanitary provisions to technical barriers to trade. So unless until we focus on that, the good thing is that WTO now is not only revised GATT TRIPS, but it is now have now included the trade facilitation agreement as well. So these are a couple of points that I had. And on the last question, just I'll take 2 minutes on RCEP versus BRICS. Yeah, that's an interesting point that both can coexist. What we wanted to do is that what are the relative benefits? There are more gains by aligning with RCEP rather than BRICS. So should we look at East Asia? That's what Professor Manmohan Singh used to say in the 90s. Or should we align with the European Union, the OECDs, and the other countries? So, so in context of this, we saw that it is more beneficial to align with RCEP only in terms of trade in goods. If you bring in services and investments, the scenario will change. And we have yet to do that. Probably it is a good starting point for a new research, which includes investments and services. And we could do it because GTAP model includes not only trade in goods, it also includes services. SMART doesn't include services.
Thank you, sir. I would respond to his question, I believe working at a trade body, I believe, or what's my observation is that there is no effective market compulsion for trade, interregional trade. If there was strong market compulsion, trade would take place, even informally. So our products are geared for, export products are geared for Europe and the Americas, not for India or Nepal. So our production facilities, investments are structured that way. So lack of market demand. The cost is too high for transactions.
Thank you. Dr. Akbar?
I actually have been away from Bangladesh for a very long time, so my understanding of South Asia is very limited. But then again, if you address any question in terms of trade, from the theoretical aspect at least, like it says regional cooperation is, you should welcome it. You should welcome it. But at the same time, like you should welcome it, but you should understand who's actually benefiting out of it. If you look at Bangladesh, I understand middle class and upper middle class, they have gained from all these foreign direct investments and trade. But a portion of our society is left out. And increasingly, this inequality is increasing over time. That is a concern. That is a concern. And for a stable and sustainable economy, it's important that we address those questions where inequality is minimized. Okay? That would be all. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Madam, I was expecting some answer. Answer from some of our colleagues. But well, e-commerce is not only important for Bangladesh and other countries, but very much important for Nepal. I'm saying for Nepal because it reduces the problem of landlockedness. One thing, and another, you can start business with very little investment. You don't need much investment. And another factor, well, we are having young educated labor force, and that can be easily utilized in e-commerce. But particularly the problem for us, and particularly South Asian countries, the domestic preparedness. Domestic preparedness in the sense, one factor we need that kind of rules, regulations, and law relating privacy and all these things. And in physical aspects, first we need internet access. Second, we need payment system intact. Another, we need infrastructure, particularly postal services and transport services. So I'm just giving an example of experience of India. Imagine what Indian e-business try to address those problems. Okay, in India, internet coverage is high, there is no problem. But payment system, many people don't use this credit card. So what they did is they started cash and delivery. Instead of going through credit card, they started cash and delivery. And another, India doesn't have a good postal system and transport system. What they did is They have their own, they have warehouses in different cities, like Delhi, like in Calcutta, Bombay, Madras, or even small cities like Chandigarh. So they have started having warehouses in different cities. Diversified their warehousing facility, and they also started having their own transport system. So my point is, okay, e-commerce, we need to go for that, but my point is we need to, okay, we need domestic preparedness. That's the major factor. Okay, with this clarification, I request our special guest for a special remark. Mr. Ali Ahmed, Chief Executive Officer, Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute, Dhaka.
Mr. Chair, Dr. Posh Pandey, my distinguished paper readers, and the illustrious discussant, and my very distinguished listeners for today. We often use unenviable. The position of the special guest is really an enviable one, because he almost has nothing to do. What the paper readers have done, they have said everything they had to say, and the discussant has made a post-mortem of it, making it very intelligible, and the chair has summarized most of it. So the special guest is left with almost nothing to say in addition to what has already been said. But still, I would like to add, with your kind permission, a few words and a few ideas, if you kindly please. I go in order of seniority, in order of the serial way they have placed it here. The first one was Dr. Rushde Elahi Akbar's paper on heterogeneous farms, trade, and FDI and inequality welfare. It's a very, very well written and well thought out paper. This is but purely theoretical. He was presenting and I was looking. I had, being a special discussant, a special guest, I had the advantage of getting it a day ahead. So I had the advantage of looking at the Greek letters. We also read. I was a student of economics. But I was wondering how many of us among the audience could understand all those summation signs and there's alpha, beta, theta, gamma, and all those things. If you want to be frightened, then economics is one of the best things to start saying. But I will try. I will try to take you out of that frightened condition. What he has placed is very scientifically, mathematically putting the truth, the very truth. But being a trained economist, he has put it mathematically. That is the easiest and most accurate way. But if you straightly say about the FDIs and heterogeneous farms, that if you have different farms in your country and you have infusion of FDIs into that country for direct investment, what happens? The common sense says that foreign direct investment comes only to the sectors where the investors from abroad will see that it's more profitable in that place than elsewhere or than in his own country. And what happens? They produce here in Bangladesh, for example, if something comes from outside, they produce here at a lower cost, but paying a little higher wages to the laborers here. And so the higher wages to the laborers compared to the wages paid to laborers working in the indigenous countries, that would create an inequality. Equality is always created if there is an innovation, he has said. If there is an innovation, there is new technology, inequality is created. You cannot do away with it. But should you be frightened of inequality? I remember in the 60s when Dr. Mahbubul Haq, the beginner of that UN Human Index, he said, we read in the classrooms, of course it was not a textbook, but it's one of the reference books. He said, some inequality is welcome because inequality leads to innovation and leads to further attempts from elsewhere to go for economic development. He welcomed two things, inequality and inflation, but mild inflation. We nowadays abhor many of these things. But inequality is not a thing to be frightened of. It comes, but it can be taken care of by a benign, by a pro-people government, and it can be taken care of through fiscal measures, through social works program, and other things. So inequality can come. This is the theoretical side in short. I'm just shortening it. In very short, he has presented this theoretical aspect of our investment, our production, of FDIs, and all those things. Very well written paper. I must thank him very greatly. Though it is basically for the economists of the economists for understanding these things. I'm being very short because it has already been discussed. And the next one is, the paper is by Dr. Somesh Mathur. He has two other junior colleagues with him, but his name is very prominent and he is present here today. It's relative benefits, losses, oblique of course, of India aligning with RCEP and BRICS countries under the conjecture of free trade area for goods, he has emphasized. Well, it has been very widely discussed. He has placed it in a very well and nice researched manner, as it should have been, and it has been well responded to and received by the floor. But sometimes we might wonder that what does Bangladesh has to do, whether India joins BRICS or joins RCEP? Do we have a great reason to think of this? In the first instance, India is a very close neighbor and a very good friend of ours and having a lot of common borders. So whether it affects us if they join the RCEP, he has proved conclusively that joining in the free trade agreement with RCEP, Regional Cooperation for Economic Partnership, is more beneficial for India. But how does it affect us? We might wonder. Well, it does. We have things to think of. When you think of your country, Bangladesh, it is affected. If India joins in a free trade agreement with RCEP, as he has said, found out in his paper, we have implications for us, very important implications. I do not say very great things, but one important thing is that it has some beneficial effects, as he has said. It would involve 49% of the world's population and 30% of the GDP of the world, and 29% of world trade and 26% of FDI. And in a matter of 1 decade, the world wealth, if India and others in the RCEP is formed in a free trade agreement, the wealth of the world will go up by $260 to $644 billion in a year. These are all very good things and we welcome it. But for Bangladesh, if it doesn't join the RCEP, unfortunately, and fortunately for me, I see before me one distinguished past Foreign Secretary of Commerce who asked a question, and two past additional secretaries, one of whom is my immediate direct colleague, and the other one is also a good friend. I don't know what they have done, but if we do not join the RCEP in the free trade agreement, Bangladesh will stand to lose 0.06% of its exports by way of trade diversion, because India will have free trade with the RCEP countries and will not have it unless we go for SAFTA literally and all that. We will lose our trade with India and other countries of the RCEP to the extent of 0.06%, which will amount to $80 million US. And we will lose our GDP to the extent of 0.69%. It's not very easy things. And TPP, of course, is not dead. Though Donald Trump, the most discussed person in the world today, he has said no to TPP, but TPP might be coming in a different way. So think of TPP without America, it is possible, or America forming bilateral trade agreements with many of the TPP countries, for us especially Vietnam, for example, the double for us will then come back. So we have to think of that, and trade creation and trade diversion that is created by RCEP or even by BRICS though he has said BRICS is less beneficial for India, which is true, as he has shown, mathematically and otherwise. I commend him for that. So therefore, although Bangladesh is already very late, too late I should say, it should immediately open discussions for joining RCEP. Not that I was asking my colleague, Mr. Amitabh Chakraborty, is a former additional secretary. It's not because Bangladesh is barred by being an LDC. There is Cambodia, there are other LDC countries. So Bangladesh should immediately, I wish there was someone from the government ministry of Foreign Affairs or Commerce who are here. They are not here. But I request you, or maybe we would be writing to the government, that they should immediately open discussion with the RCEP countries to be able to join there. I would not, and then Mr. Quoreshi, he has again and again said that he is not a specialist, that he is not a professor, but he has very eloquently placed his points of view, very nicely placed his points of view. But by the sidelines, he has not forgotten to mention that he was a student of economics and of mathematics. Very slightly sounded words, but that threatened with us with the information he has given, and he has very rightly given it. Very well written paper too. I must commend all the three paper writers for their very efficient, very nicely written and well presented papers, and the discussant for his very good discussion. He also said he does not know anything, but he seems to know many things that many of us are. And the chair, his function is not over yet, but so far he has given a very good account of himself, and since I will not have an opportunity of talking after this, except unofficially, so I must also thank the chair very greatly, and SANEM and Dr. Salim Rahan for arranging such a beautiful, beautiful occasion for exchanging views and ideas with economists from all over the SAARC countries, especially later in the afternoon today, and with the elites, some, not all, some of the elites of these countries. We are very happy to be able to speak before all of you gentlemen. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Ali Ahmed. Now we are heading towards the end of this session. And I think, we already exhausted our allocated time. That's why I don't want to, or I don't dare to summarize very rich presentation and discussions over here. But I would like to, highlight few takeaways from this session. The first one is international trade is beneficial for South Asian countries. It increases efficiency, productivity, and total welfare of the countries. But, and it also creates winner and losers. So from policy perspective, what we need to do is we need to have trade adjustment policies to address the inequalities generated by trade, number one. Number two, as Ahmed indicated, okay, now we are having new kind of global economic landscape after President Donald Trump's era. And that is a very big, threat to globalization and liberalization. So, here out of this, global landscape, I think, there is another justifications to work together for South Asian countries. To deepen economic cooperation within South Asia. And in order to optimize the benefits of regional cooperation in South Asia, we need to address the issue of sensitive list, the issue of non-tariff measures, the issues of trade facilitations, and also we need to reduce trade cost. And if we can address all these issues, this would help developing and participating in regional value chain. Why I am focusing on the regional value chain is now the global production system production process has changed. Now we trade in task rather than in product. So we need to develop this regional value chain. And with this, I thank all panelists and participants for helping me to run this session. I close this session over here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for participating in the lively discussion. Now we move on to the crest presenting ceremony. I would like to request Dr. Pandey to present the crest to Mr. Ali Ahmed. Then to Dr. Muhammad Yunus. Then to Dr. Rushde Elahi Ahmed. Then to Dr. Somesh Mathur. Then to Mr. Shaquib Quoreshi. Thank you, Dr. Pandey. Now, may I request Mohammad Mushir Hanan from SANEM to present the crest to Dr. Pandey.